Alrighty, my little math witches, it's time for your next class. We are going to be adding and subtracting, and you should know how to add and subtract by now, but we're going to be adding, subtracting positive and negative numbers together, and it could get tricky, so let's get started. Now, I'm going to introduce to you the number line I'm sure everybody's seen the number line, but just in a way that I would really like you to think about when you're doing these adding and subtracting positives and negatives. It may or may not help, but this is how I do it. Here we go. Now, the first thing I did was kind of just imagine, and this should be going on in your head, everybody. Imagine, hey, 10 is about here, negative 10 is about here, and if my problem is 6 plus 3, well, every time you always start at 0, you look at the first number and kind of go there. So 6 is right around here. So I've taken care of this 6. Now 3, I'm going to go 3 more. And that'll get me to 9. Now I've moved to the right because these are positive numbers, but when we have negative numbers, we're going to start moving to the left. Now, here's my next problem, and before I even start to do anything, I want to explain something about adding and subtracting. Notice here we are adding a negative number. As it turns out in math, we are actually always adding numbers. When you see a minus sign, that just represents that the number is a negative number. So we are always adding numbers, but we are either adding positive numbers or negative numbers. Here in this case, it turns out that this is kind of like saying 9 minus 12. Well, 9 is not as big as 12, and if we try to take away 12 things from 9, we're going to end up with a negative. So if we follow the rules I did with our first problem, let's look at the first number. It's 9, and both of these we can look at. So if I were to go to 9 and end up at 9, my next number is here it's a negative 12, here I'm saying minus 12. I kind of prefer this because it tells me that the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go 12 spaces, but I'm not going to go to the right, I'm going to go to the left. And what ends up happening if I go to the left, I'm going to end up over here at negative 3. And so my final answer here is negative 3. Now here, this problem is a little tricky, but it's actually written the way that I like to see it. It's showing that this is an addition of two negative signs. So if we follow the rules again, our first number is negative 6. So if I start at 0 and I go negative 6, in other words, the direction into the negative, and I stop here at negative 6, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add negative 8. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go this direction 8 places, and I actually end up here, I believe, at negative 14. So the answer here is negative 14, and here's a visual of what actually happens. For a problem like 8 plus negative 7, again, that plus sign is ideal for me. It works for my method. The first thing I'm going to look at is the 8. So I'm going to start at 0 and I'm going to go over to 8. I'm not going to keep writing down these lines here. I don't want to get it too messy, but I would go from 0 to 8. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go 7 spaces, but I'm going to go the negative direction. And I would end up going back and I would end up here at 1. So 8 plus a negative 7, the answer is 1. Now, here's a problem where, at first glance, it just kind of looks like a normal problem, but really, I would hope that you recognize this as a 2 plus a negative 14, because it makes it easier to do my number line technique. So I'm going to rewrite this. And notice that here I now have a plus sign and I have a negative 14 in the parentheses. And now if I follow my rules, if I start at 0 and go 2 in the positive direction and end up here, and then I go 14 in the negative direction, I actually am going to end up over here at negative 12. So my final answer here is negative 12. And here again we have a problem where I see a negative 9 minus a 3. And like I said before, it's nice to have that plus sign in there because I can use my number line technique. So here, this is actually a negative 3, so I'm going to rewrite this. And here I even put parentheses to clarify that this is a negative 9 plus a negative 3. And now when I start my operation, I can just simply start at 0, and notice I'm going to move to the left 9 spaces because it's negative, and that will put me about right at negative 9. And now I'm going to go 3 spaces to the left because it's negative. So 9, 10, 11, and I'll end up right there at negative 12. Now, when we start to get to bigger problems, now, using the number 9 line might not be so practical. There are ways that it could be practical. That's not the lesson in this lecture. But here, just keep in mind that you're going to go in the positive direction 27 spaces, but then you're going to go in the negative direction 46 spaces. So immediately you should know you're going to end up with a negative number. So here I've gone ahead and put my negative sign here. Now all I have to do is take the difference between these two, and I will get my answer. So basically what I'm saying is you can say 46 minus 27. That will give you the difference, and that will give you the amount that should be here. Again, the negative 46 is the bigger number, so when you take the difference, you have to say 46 take away 27. It turns out that value is 19, so your final answer here should be negative 19. Now here, to some it may seem simple, and to others this may seem quite difficult. Let's just follow the rules. If I start with my first number 16 and it's negative, I'm going to go 16 spaces to the left. And then when I come to the next number 16, it's positive. So now I would move back 16 spaces to the right, and I would just end up at 0. Negative 16 plus 16 is 0. And here's our next problem, and we have 117 plus a negative 79. Now this is a case where if I rewrote this like this, which is very doable, and it doesn't change anything, this is a problem that we are normally used to in elementary school, where you have a bigger number minus a smaller number, and in this case we can just follow those rules. And if I take away 79 from 117, I end up with 38. Now here I'm throwing at you an absolute value problem with a negative sign on the inside, so we can really see this at work. So I have the absolute value of negative 6 plus a negative 61. So the first thing I'm going to do is evaluate my absolute value of 6. It becomes a 6, and my negative 61 just stays the same. Again, here I have a negative number that is much bigger than a positive number, so I know my answer is going to be negative. And now I only need to take their difference, and I end up with a negative 55. Okay, here's a problem that a lot needs to be said about, and we need to be very careful, and please pay attention to this. I'm showing you a negative 3 on the top divided by an 8 plus a 5/8. Because the negative sign is on the top, well, that can be a little tricky. As it turns out, it really means that the entire number is negative. It also means that you can put the negative sign with the 8 and call this 3 divided by negative 8. But I think it's always best, and I can't really think of any cases where it isn't best, where you just leave the negative, bring the negative sign to the outside of the problem, and we can go from there. Now I don't have to worry about anything with the denominator because they're both the same, so I know I'm going to have an 8 on the bottom here. But on the top, this is going to now interpret to a negative 3 plus a 5, which sort of is weird after everything I just went through with the sign. But because those denominators were the same and I combined the 8, I didn't want to deal with the negative sign on the bottom, so now I put it back on the top. Negative 3 plus 5 becomes 2, and we still have the 8 on the bottom. When I look at how to reduce this, I end up with a 2 over a 2 times 4, so my 2's cancel. Don't forget my 1, and I end up with 1/4. Alright, here we have something that might look a little complicated, but if we just take it piece by piece, it's not too bad. If I evaluate this first part inside the brackets, a -2 plus a -7 will be going in the negative direction 2 spaces and 7 spaces. That will get me to -9. Notice I wrote brackets. Really, I probably should have put parentheses, but because they were here, I kind of just left them there. It really doesn't matter, again, brackets or parentheses. Usually I should have parentheses in this case, but not a big deal. Here, -11 plus 22. And for you perfectionists, just to be irritating, I went ahead and used parentheses here, but it doesn't matter. -11 plus 22 is 11. And now we're left with the problem of -9 plus 11. So if I go -9 spaces on the number line, I'll be going to the left 9. Then I'll have my 11. I'll be going to the right 11, and I will end up exactly at number 2. Alright, so here's my next problem, and really this is something where you just need to be very careful about what you're doing. We have decimal points, we have signs here, so let's go ahead and start inside here and see what we get. I have a 0.5 plus a -0.3 plus a 0.4. I think I'm going to add my 0.4 and 0.5 first. What I end up getting is a 0.9 plus a -0.3. So I'm going to do what's inside here first and then finish with my, oops, I forgot a plus sign. And if I go 0.9 in the positive direction and 0.3 in the negative direction, I get 0.6. So -0.3 plus 0.6, you should already see you're going to end up with a negative number here. And without any further calculation, I would expect you to see that this is -0.7. Alright class, thanks for coming to class. I appreciate your viewing, and I'll see you next time. Math is magic, and I am the Math Witch.